Hi, this is Erin Owens from the SHSU Library, and this short video is going to talk about copyright licensing and OER, Open Educational Resources. Just to start with a few basic definitions, open educational resources are defined by UNESCO with this definition here: teaching, learning, and research materials in any medium that either reside in the public domain or have been released under an open license that permits no-cost access and use with no or limited restrictions. And I want to place a little bit of an emphasis myself on the two pieces of this, the open license and the no cost. So it's very helpful to take a moment and distinguish between free materials and open materials. Both of them are free to use at no cost. So free materials are going to still be protected by copyright, even though you may use them for $0. The National Academies Press is a good example of this. The National Academies Press sells print copies of all of their reports and things. They are still protected in every respect by copyright restrictions, but you may use the PDFs of those reports on their website for free. So you may open those PDFs, you may read them, you may download a copy, but you cannot redistribute it, you cannot resell it, you cannot edit it, you cannot do many of these other things with it that are protected by their exclusive copyrights. Open materials, on the other hand, are also available for you for $0, but they also provide greater levels of permission for what you can do with the materials. Normally we think of this as the 5 R's: remix, revise, reuse, retain, and redistribute. Occasionally, the revise and remix piece of that is not accessible. People debate as to whether or not you should still call it an OER if you cannot revise and remix it. But either way, it is material that is free for faculty and students to use. Now, I want to identify a third category of material here that I think is important. It is not open, and it is not freely obtained at the root, but it is freely available for faculty and students to make use of because it has already been legally purchased or licensed by the SHSU Library. So if our emphasis here is on materials which a student and a faculty member can use at no cost to them, then we can identify these three different buckets of sources: things that are copyrighted but free, things that are open, and things that have already been paid for. So backing up, before we get a little bit too far into Creative Commons licenses, I want to make sure we clearly understand, how does someone create a copyrighted work? The instant that you create original content in a fixed medium, like writing down text on paper, typing a textual document, or recording a video, you own the copyright to that work. You are not required to take any additional steps to register or secure your copyright. There are additional steps you can take just for greater levels of protection against copyright infringement, but they are not required. The minute you create it, you own the copyright in it. So understanding that, how does someone create OER? There's a wide variety of platforms and tools and repositories and things out there for how you can author and host. I don't want to worry about that part, okay? Let's stick with the core concept. Essentially, you just create something, a piece of content, whether it's a video, text document, whatever it is. Then you own the copyright because you've created original content in a fixed medium. Then you place an open license on that piece of content that you've created, and you make it publicly available. That could be through YouTube, through Google Docs, or by depositing it into an OER repository like the OER Commons. That's it. You create it, you paste the license on it, and you put it out into the world somewhere. And that's it. It can be that simple. You have created an OER. Any content you have already created in the past to use in teaching or for other purposes could become OER simply by you sharing it publicly with an open license. So it really is important to decide that when someone decides to share content as OER, they still own the copyright. They are not by default just throwing it into the public domain. They are not required to give up an item to the public domain. So by virtue of owning the copyright to that creative work or to that intellectual property, they can set the parameters for how other people can use it. The Creative Commons licenses are one option for how they communicate the permissions that they're granting. For instance, one of their exclusive rights under copyright is the right to earn a monetary profit from their content. They could communicate that I am allowing you to reuse this work, but I am not allowing you to resell it. I am protecting my exclusive right to profit. So Creative Commons is a tool that helps them with that communication process. There are other kinds of open licenses and other ways that a creator could communicate what parameters there are for reuse. A Creative Commons license does not replace copyright. That is absolutely critical to understand. It does not displace or replace copyright. Your copyright is still here. Your Creative Commons license lays on top of your copyright. It adds a layer of nuance and clarification that says, I own the copyright, I have all of these rights, I will proactively grant you these permissions so that you don't have to request all those permissions individually. But if you want to do something else that I haven't granted in this overlay, then it still comes back down to the copyright layer that you have to contact me and get permission, or else be in violation of copyright. So as you can see here in the graphic of this continuum, these open licenses create a middle ground between full copyright protection with all rights reserved and content that is fully in the public domain with no rights reserved. It gives us a middle ground where some rights are granted and some rights are reserved. So I want to dig into the licenses a little bit more to understand what a Creative Commons license is composed of and how you understand what permissions it grants or does not grant. Every Creative Commons license is built on a foundation of 4 possible elements. These elements are shown here: attribution, no derivatives, share alike, and non-commercial. Attribution just means that you have to attribute me. Whatever permissions I've granted you, it is on the condition that you give me credit as the creator. No derivatives, this is the part where that revise and remix from the 5 R's comes in. I could say that you can use my work as it is, but you can't edit it and create new works from it, like new edited versions. Share alike essentially means that if you do create a new derivative work, if I've allowed derivatives and you create one, you need to share it with at least as open a license as I have shared it here. You can think of this a little bit like paying it forward. You got to benefit from using my content. Other people should benefit from using yours as well. It also reinforces that something based on your labor, which you wanted to be open, cannot become locked down in some other capacity. And then the last element is non-commercial. You can specify whether or not someone else is allowed to make money off of this work. So if we look here at the licenses, so with those 4 elements, you can combine them in different ways to create 6 possible licenses. CC BY is what we call this first license, that essentially says do whatever you want on earth as long as you attribute me as the creator. CC BY ND, do whatever you want with my work as it is, but credit me and don't create new versions. CC BY NCSA, you can do what you want as long as you credit me, don't make money, and pay it forward by sharing alike with this license. Attribution, so CC BY SA, do whatever you want with the work as long as you credit me and share it with this license. So that still would theoretically allow someone to make a profit, since it does not have a non-commercial element. But if they're also sharing it under this same license, it kind of negates that profit anyway. CC by NC, do whatever you want with it as long as you don't profit. And that could include creating derivative works or creating works that are more restricted in their licenses, as long as you don't make money off it. And then CC by NC-ND, this is the most restrictive. You can use it exactly as it is without changes for a non-commercial purpose and credit me. It is worthwhile to note that there is one other option that exists within the CC licensing landscape, which is CC0. CC0 essentially says, I don't want to reserve any of my exclusive rights under copyright law. I am giving up all of these rights. You can literally do whatever you want with this work, including not even attributing me, and I don't want to maintain any exclusive rights. In a sense, we think of that as releasing our work to the public domain, but it is important to realize that there is a nuanced distinction between CC0 and public domain. You may choose to apply CC0 to your own work to waive copyright where copyright would otherwise still legally apply. When we label something as public domain or PD, that applies only to works that are already free of known copyright, that are in the public domain throughout the world. So copyright would no longer legally apply to those works. All right, this is just a slightly different way of looking at the 6 licenses, and the public domain license, or the CC marker. They've kind of conflated the two even on this graphic, but this is just a different way of visualizing exactly which permissions you do and don't get with each license. I like this graphic in terms of trying to classify the licenses from what is the most free, the least restrictive, to the least free, or the most restrictive. So just CC BY, this is about as open as you can get while still retaining copyright. And then CC BY NC-ND is the most restrictive. Now I've got a second graphic here that's really very similar, showing a similar kind of transition from least free to most free. But what I like about this one in particular is that they've indicated which licenses they believe fit the definition of OER and which do not. So you'll see there are 2 licenses here, and it's essentially the 2 that include no derivatives, because you cannot revise and remix them. That is interpreted as not really fulfilling the definition of a true OER. But again, for our purposes, if the goal is to use course content that doesn't cost students money, those licenses are still acceptable for that purpose, even if we can't necessarily say that they are true OER. All right, shifting gears just for a bit, understanding how existing materials can be adapted based on what license they have on them. You know, the license tells you what I can do with thing A, but if I'm trying to put thing A and thing B together, I need to know how their licenses work together. So there's an idea of collections and remixes. If we look at these 2 images here, essentially the TV dinner is a collection. We've pulled a set of objects together, but they can be distinguished. They can be separated. They still remain discrete objects within a set. If you drop an openly licensed photo into your original text, you've created a collection. You would just cite the photo and cite its open license. On the other hand, if you see the picture here of a smoothie, it shows you all the kinds of fruit that went into it. Each fruit has its own license. We've dumped all the fruit in a blender and smushed them and crushed them and blended them to the point that you cannot, once again, separate the smoothie out into its component bananas and strawberries. So the smoothie is a remix. if you were to take several open textbook chapters on a similar topic and start mixing together sentences and ideas from each one, revised with your own original words and ideas, eventually you get to a remix smoothie. Eventually you get to a point where you could no longer go through with parenthetical citations and clearly cite which words belonged to which component work. When we create a remix like this, we're limited in what and how we can remix based on the licenses of the component pieces. There's also implications for what license we can slap onto our resulting smoothie. So let's look at this a little bit more. If you want to know whether you can remix 2 or more existing works, you want to find their respective axes, their respective license on the x-axis and the y-axis, and check the square where where those 2 licenses intersect. If the 2 licenses intersect in a green check mark here, those 2 works can be blended into a smoothie. If those 2 licenses intersect with a black X, then those 2 licenses are not compatible. You cannot put those in the blender together to make a smoothie. So this can get much more complicated when you're really planning on integrating material at an inseparable level. You need to understand the licenses going into it. Then, as I said, there's also implications for what license you can put on your remixed smoothie. So that's what this second graphic helps with. If you're starting with the content that you know you want to adapt and mix, you would verify what licenses are on that content and find a column. You want to find the column from the top where all of the component licenses are green. So for an example, if I know I want to mix together CC BY and CC BY NCSA, I'm going to go through these columns and go, okay, where is the BY row green and the NCSA row is green? And I'm going to see that I'll be in the BY NCSA column. Okay, so if I'm mixing CC BY and CC BY NCSA, my resulting smoothie has to be licensed as CC BY NCSA. If for some reason you're starting with a license, maybe you're creating this in a context where you're required to use a particular type of license, or you wish to use a particular type of license, you focus in that column, and that shows you what kinds of content you would be eligible to include in your adaptation. So if you're required to use a CC BY license, this would show you that you can only use existing works with BY and BY NC licenses. I've got a few links here to some excellent collections for finding openly licensed content. This is far from comprehensive, of course, just some large things worth knowing, and a couple of links for places you can find more of these collections. But I do want to insert a little bit of a caveat here, okay? Caveat emptor, buyer beware, even if you're not really buying it because it's free. Please recognize that human beings are putting material into these repositories. Sometimes they make mistakes or are knowingly doing something wrong, either way. Someone may upload material that they do not actually own the copyright to, which means they may not have the right to put an open license on it. In other cases, they may put up content that they don't own, which is still protected by copyright. So the first part of this is that items within the same repository are going to have different licenses. You want to look at the license on every individual item carefully, but you also need to use your good judgment that if you see content that doesn't really seem to look right with the way that it claims to be licensed, be wary. Okay, and so just to give you an example, I found an item recently in the OER Commons. It had the name of the person who submitted it, and it had an open license in the metadata in the repository. I opened the actual PDF file to view this learning resource. It had a different author's name inside of it. It was clearly marked by Pearson Textbook Company, and there was an explicitly visible copyright notice on the material. So it was very obvious that someone had posted a chapter out of a Pearson textbook that they did not own the rights to, that they were not eligible to put that open license on. I did report that to the OER Commons and have it removed. But it's very, very important to use your good judgment to say, this doesn't look right, and I'm not going to get in trouble for using this content that really does not look like it's actually open licensed. Last little tidbit I wanted to cover here is the idea of citing openly licensed content that we use. Whether we just reuse a single item or we remix several things together, we want to think about how we fulfill that attribution element of the license, that by element. In general, it is recommended that CC licensed content be attributed using the tassel format, title, author, source, and license. They have an example here on the screen for this photo of cupcakes. The title of the work is Creative Commons 10th Birthday Celebration San Francisco by TVOL, is licensed under CC BY 2.0. And you can tell from the blue text that the title of the work is linked to to the source of the original work, and then the CC BY 2.0 text is linked to the full text of that actual license. If you modify the work, you need to note that in your attribution. There are some really excellent examples at this link on the Creative Commons wiki where they show a derivative work of this same cupcake photo with some very minor adaptations, and then a derivative with much more significant adaptations, and they show you how they modify the attribution with best practices. When you have CC0 and public domain content, it is not required that those be cited. Remember, CC0, someone is effectively saying, I don't even need you to attribute me. Just do whatever you want with it and leave me out of it. I don't want to protect my copyright. So you're not required to cite them. However, it is recommended that you generally do so when possible for courtesy, just to maintain respect and credit within the open education field. So this photo on the slide, this cute puppy dog laying down here, is a CC0 licensed photo. And I've included two different examples of how you could cite it just to be respectful, even though, again, CC0 citations are not required. A couple of additional resources I wanted to note just because there are a few big ones to reference. Creative Commons itself has an FAQ page. This is where I pulled those two tables where you line up the licenses to determine what you can remix and how you can license your remixes. These tables came out of that FAQ page. It is very long. It is very full of detail. So if you run into any questions about the licenses themselves and how you use and remix content, definitely bookmark their FAQ page as a good resource. There's also this site online called OER on OER. This is literally a collection of open educational resources about open educational resources. Very meta. And there is a section in there on copyright and licensing that provides a lot of other videos, documents, explanations that kind of reinforce the stuff I've been talking about today if you feel like you want to dig deeper into more of that. And then finally, I have linked our SHSU Libraries Guide to Teaching with OER. If you have questions at any time, please feel free to reach out to me directly. As the scholarly communications librarian, supporting and educating people on campus about OER is part of my job description. So by all means, reach out to me. I am Creative Commons licensed. So I've been through a full course designed for librarians to educate on on open licenses and the use of CC licenses with OER. So please feel free to reach out to me anytime, and I look forward to helping you. Thank you.